When we do what we will, what we think we desire with technology, we are, as it were, blowing up our image of ourselves to enormous proportions. And many of us are beginning to realize that we don't like it. We discover ourselves to be beings that are hostile to the environment and that are bent on dominating it to the point of destruction. That we don't feel at home in the universe. We feel that our skin, at the very least, is a boundary between a palpitating, sensitive consciousness that's terrified of what's outside the skin and terrified of a good deal that's inside it, like bacteria and cancer cells, weak arteries, cholesterol, what have you. So we have this strange thing that Lancelot White called the European dissociation, the feeling of oneself as a prisoner, involuntarily so, in a hostile world that does not give a damn about our egos. And therefore, when news comes from all about, whether it be from the Orient or whether it be from experiments with psychedelic drugs, when news comes that this feeling of our own existence may be a hallucination, people prick up their ears and would like to know, is there some other mode of consciousness which one can be in, which is not this alienated mode? Because we feel, I think many of us, very, very strongly, that if there is such a place, we would like to be there. That, of course, entails difficulties, which we shall go into. But this is the starting point of the fascination for yoga, for zazen, and also for the Taoist forms of meditation, which are much less known. But there arise problems about this when we are going to convey these disciplines to Western people. Because Western people who are interested in things of this kind are apt to be very interested. Whereas, on the other hand, in cultures where things of this kind have been known for thousands of years, there is a tendency for them to become rather rotish. And therefore, the way of teaching these disciplines, which many Asian teachers use, are designed not for mature adults, but for relatively young people who are not interested in learning them. In other words, when a kind of religion, let's take the case of Zen Buddhism, or in Chinese it is called Chan, when after some years pious people have followed these disciplines and learned to enjoy them, they have a way of telling their children that you ought to enjoy this too. See? And we would like you to go to the monastery. And furthermore, when there's the superstitious feeling that raising a son to be a monk or a priest redounds to one's own good merit in future lives, the more sons you send into the priesthood, the better. It's the same in Catholic countries. It was the same among the British in the Anglican Church during the 18th century, when the first son of the family went into the law, because he had then a good chance of being a successful politician. The second son went into the army, and the third son went into the priesthood. And it was a matter of course. And they had no real interest in religion. They weren't really curious. It was something they were studying out of filial duty to their parents. And especially in these days in Japan, when in order to inherit your father's temple, you have to go to the monastery and take Zen training. It becomes a matter of some urgency. So you have a lot of unwilling young men sometimes young women, in the nunneries, learning the meditative disciplines under the supervision of ecclesiastical taskmasters who are everywhere in the world exactly the same. I attended, from the ages of 13 to 17, an ecclesiastical boys' boarding school in England. I can assure you I've had enough of it. We were very sternly disciplined in the same way as Zen monks are disciplined in Japan today. And it just strikes me as funny that I have what I call the aching legs school of Zen, in which one sits in Zazen for an unnecessarily long time until one gets paralyzed. And then people come back from Japan or from anywhere and brag about how their legs hurt, as if it was some extremely esoteric discipline. And, you know, they bang them about with boards on the shoulders, and like in England, they swipe them on the bottoms with canes. And it's all the same old story. And I think we need to go beyond this and develop a certain maturity towards the practice of meditation that is not based on all this boys' boarding school business. But it's very difficult to make people who have been brought up in that system see the point. Because they say, well, we got it this way, and that's the way you have to go in order to get it. So we have discussed this matter, and we feel that there can be an approach which does not insult the dignity of interested Western adults. Oh, some people love to have their dignity insulted because they think it's good for them, because it's going to subdue their egoistic pride. But nothing is more egoistic than the project of subduing your egoistic pride. We can read it straight out of Zhuangzi in the dialogue between Lao Tzu and Confucius. Or, you know, it's an apocryphal dialogue. Zhuangzi was a great humorist, and he used the most outrageous stories and examples to illustrate his points. And so he put into the mouth of Confucius all sorts of things that Confucius would never have dreamed of saying, but he also arranges a dialogue between Lao Tzu and Confucius in which Confucius gets the wrong end of the stick, where Lao Tzu talks to him and asks him, what is your teaching? And he says it is charity and duty to one's neighbor and absence of self. Well, he says, sir, you are causing great disruption in the empire. Is not your elimination of self a positive manifestation of self? You are like somebody beating a drum in search of a fugitive. I mean, we would say it is like the police about to raid a whorehouse with the sirens on, so that everybody hears them coming and runs away. You see? So in the same way, when you go after with the project to eliminate your selfishness, nothing could be more in the nature of spiritual pride. And you will work on it, and the more you work on it and get uptight and stiff, the more your spiritual bulge increases. So in the Taoist doctrines, there is a principle called Wu Wei. And this means, Wu means none or not, no, negation. Wei has a combination of meanings. It can mean action, making, but the best translation I have found for it is forcing. And so Wu Wei is the principle of not forcing in anything that you do. Now we know when we watch any performance of an artist, be it a dancer or an actor or a musician, we know immediately when the performance is forced. And we say it doesn't ring true, it's too artificial, it doesn't seem to be natural. Many people who study the Taoist doctrines think that Wu Wei means do nothing, in the sense of laissez-faire, be lazy, always be passive. It doesn't mean that. There is a time for action. When you study judo, you use muscle only at the right moment. When your opponent is hopelessly overextended and off balance, and you add a little muscle to it and you throw him across the room. But only then. You never use muscle at the wrong moment. For as Shakespeare knew perfectly well, there is a tide in the affairs of men which, taken at its flood, leads on to fortune. And so Wu Wei is based on knowledge of the tide, the drift of things. Get with it. Wu Wei is the art of sailing rather than the art of rowing. So, if you say now, one of the most famous sayings in the Lao Tzu book is, superior virtue has no intention to be virtuous, and thus is virtue. Inferior